So it can go to a point where, for instance, a VC would invest a very small amount at a very high valuation. As a founder, you think you've done a really good job because you've made your spreadsheet, you've shown them that there's massive potential. The VCs have looked at it and see no way he's gonna hit those numbers.
Welcome to the Raw and Real podcast. Are you dreaming of changing your life through opening a business, or are you curious what obstacles entrepreneurs had to overcome on their journey? Then you're in the right place. My name is Agnes Pillik and I'm your host. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Raw and Real. Today's guest on the show is Schaap. He's the co-owner of Fashion Cloud, a leading platform in the fashion industry that helps brands and retailers to exchange data and work flexible together. Hey, David, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Agnes, thanks for having me. I'm very excited.
That's nice to hear. I thought we can start by talking a little bit about how it was for you growing up, because you had to grow up at a younger age than most people.
Sure, okay. So we go all the way back. So I grew up in a small town near Nijmegen. Grew up with my mom. My parents divorced when I was 2. And I got quite a unique view, I would say, because growing up with your mom is a unique thing. So my dad is Turkish. And when he met my mom, that was in Turkey, they hit it off immediately. And I think 2 years later, I was there, and they got married. But their cultural differences got the better of them, and they split up when I was 2. So then, I grew up with my mom. We came into, we started living in a village that she actually didn't come from. So it was a bit weird because we didn't have any family around. Not really. She didn't really have friends there. Also, not really the people that she was used to. So it was really a little bit us on an island in that sense. And she never worked, so we were always on state benefits. And I mean that's a big challenge, right? And I got out of it fine, but it's interesting to reflect on that sometimes. Also because I hear a lot of people talking about that, and many people have opinions about, should we have state benefits? How much should it be? Is it too much? Is it too little? And I have a different perspective on that because I actually grew up in that, right? And also very thankful for that. So grew up always pretty aware of finance and aware of the need to earn some money. So I was always also trying to earn some money, like having a little job when I was 11, started programming when I was 13, then started to make some money with that as well, and always on the lookout for ways to earn some extra.
Did that give you also anxiety that your mom wasn't working and earning herself?
It could have, I think, but I don't recall that. So there were so many small things that, looking back at it, they're a bit weird. So for instance, I like school camps, I wouldn't go. I would never go because that always costed money. But as a kid, I knew we didn't have money for that, and I just played along. So I was like, yeah, well, I'm not really interested, or some other reason why I wouldn't go. And I guess if I reflect back on it, I would say, okay, so I was aware that I couldn't go, and I was kind of protecting myself with a story. But still, I don't feel like it really hurt me or anything. It was more like a reality I simply dealt with.
All right. And then you started also programming when you were 13. So how did you get into that?
So I think it's a story that you hear quite a lot. I was gaming. We had a clan as they call it, group of 5. Nobody knew how to build a website. We needed a website, and I was interested to learn something. So I followed some online tutorials on programming language and basically just got into that. And I think first try was when I was 12, and it didn't really work out. I just didn't understand it. But a year later, I suddenly did understand it, and I was so hooked that I didn't stop ever since. Yeah, and these days I'm not really programming that much anymore, but really was really good start of my career.
And your career really started when you were 16 and you started working as an accountant for Deloitte, right? So, how did you get hired at such a young age?
So at high school, I was wondering what to do, and one of my teachers said, "Why don't you do accounting?" Because I wanted to set up my own business. I told him that, and he said, "When you do accounting, you at least you learn some real things, you know." So I thought, okay, that's interesting. I followed. I had like one sort of internship day, and I learned that you would also earn some money with it, which was important for me. And I applied for a course where I would study 2 days a week and then work 3 days a week. And then I applied for basically the few of the big guys in accounting, like Ernst& Young and Deloitte. I think Deloitte was the first one to invite me. And yeah, I was 16 back at the time, and I was really funny because I went to this recruiter in a suit, but I didn't have like dressed shoes, so I went with sneakers. And this guy was asking me questions like, "What's the craziest thing you ever done?" And I only had kids stories like climbing on a roof or that kind of stuff. To be honest, I think there was such a shortage of people in accounting that anybody who seemed smart enough and who was passionate was hired. And and so he also said, "Look, you're the youngest guy I've ever hired, and I think the youngest we have in Holland. But I could come on board and next time wear dress shoes to an interview."
And then you worked there for 2 years, and then you really started becoming an entrepreneur and opening up companies.
So I think from 16 years onward, something like that, I started having clients, building my own clients in the weekends and in the evenings, just building web shops for them, websites, and helping them out with their online strategy. And in the meantime, I was working at Deloitte, and I did that for 2 years. And I really noticed I wasn't that good at it. So I understood most of the things we were doing, like I was building these yearly reports, tax filings, corporate tax, whatever. But like for instance, I remember very clearly this one time I was doing a yearly report of a bar, and I was thinking like, who did this last year? Who made these mistakes? There were such silly mistakes, and it was actually me who did that a year before. And surely you learn something over time, but I really noticed that when I have to do a very routine job, I just stink at that. I just like my mind wanders, and so I was also quite clear to me I have to switch now because I'm not gonna be an accountant in the future. And so I also had people telling me like, why don't you just finish it? Get your degree at least, and you have something. But there I'm actually quite happy that I already early on saw that if you make it yourself too comfortable, it's also hard to change. So I was a bit afraid that if I would just finish this, then, suddenly you have an accounting degree and yeah, you can earn a lot of money with it. Why don't you just do it then? So by quitting school, I made it so uncomfortable for myself. I had to do something else. And I still believe in that. If you want to have change, that you have to force it a little bit. So anyway, I started off with already a few clients that I just collected in when I was working in the weekends, and it wasn't by any means enough to really pay for the bills or anything, but it was a start.
And can you tell us something about the lessons that you learned during these years before you started your current company?
Maybe first early lesson, and I mean, again, I was 18. I didn't have a network. My skills were very limited. I mostly had confidence. Um, so I think a lot of the things that I had to learn in the years after that are things that are also very related to age and that everybody would learn. But one of the things that I found funny is that I thought, I think maybe I was earning, let's say, $15 an hour or something at Deloitte, maybe a bit more, I don't know. And I think I could get like 30 or 40 an hour when I was doing my own stuff. So I quickly calculated that would land me way more, and I would switch and I would get rich pretty quickly. And then I really noticed the difference if you don't have clients 40 hours a week, right? But only, let's say, 10. And
For
then
sure.
suddenly your income is not what you expected. So that was like an early lesson or reality check, sort of like, okay, now I have to start doing sales and that kind of stuff. I thought I could work from the park. So I got this internet connector that back then you didn't have 4G on your phone. So I got this internet connector, got a laptop, started working in the park. And I think after 2 days or something, I was, this is actually very unproductive. It's way too warm. This is also not working. So I think I really had to hone my professional skills as well. I also very quickly noticed that I wasn't equipped enough to be successful. I didn't know anything about success, didn't know that much about even programming. I didn't, I didn't have any formal training. So I noticed, okay, I quit school, but actually I can't stop learning. I really have to learn a lot more. So then I became kind of like a book processor. I just read book after book after book on marketing, online marketing, programming, sales, the art of success, whatever it was. But I was just trying to soak up as much knowledge as possible and basically just to become a professional. So also sometimes now when I talk to young people who want to get into business, it's definitely not my advice to start at such an age. If you really have to, like I felt like I had to, then of course you do that. Um, but other than that, there are other ways to become a professional much easier. If you work at a good company, you learn everything I had to learn on my own without all the effort.
But you could have also stayed at Deloitte and learned it there.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, I think that would have made sense, but for me, I really wanted something else. And that's also a drive you cannot stop. So I don't think I had any other choice. But if you don't have such a drive, then it's also, I don't think it's a good idea to start your own business that young necessarily.
And in 2013, you started Nyon, so your current company. So how did you come up with the idea back then?
Yeah, so just to clarify, so the company is called Fashion Cloud right now. It's ever since we've merged with the German company. I used to call it Nyon. So in 2013, I was doing a lot of different things. I was basically an online strategy consulting firm with 3 people, so very small. And I had a bunch of different clients. I had accounting offices. I had big retailer in shoes, also some other clients. And I would basically just sit in a room with them, listen to what they needed. So one would say, we will need more online conversion. Another would say, I don't know, we need a new website. And I would help them achieve that. And I think it was 2012, then I think 1 year after the iPad was launched, that I thought that's actually a super cool device because it has GPS, it has a camera on board, it's very easy to carry. But there were almost no apps that really made it useful other than you had Facebook on it and YouTube and that kind of stuff, right? So it was really um, made for consumers at that point, but I thought it could do something in the business realm. So I said that to one of my clients who then actually told me how they used to buy. So they were buying shoes and they were buying thousands of shoes every year. And there was really a paper process. And I think now looking back, we've had a lot of development, a lot of companies come up that are replacing paper processes. And I was just one of them. I learned how they did everything on paper and built an iPad app for that. And things took off from there.
And how would you advise someone to get a business idea? What do you think is the best way to collect an idea and start something?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination because, as I said, this idea of building an iPad app, I had that myself, even though that doesn't really mean anything, right? So I was really putting it out there. So I think if you want a new idea, or if you're looking to do something in the world, to say that to people, I think is really important to kind of open yourself up to let it come to you. On the other hand, you can't just think of it on the couch. So for me, getting a customer to show me their buying process, that was what I needed. So I think going out there and being also willing to maybe work for free, or just learn. I would say if I need to start a new business tomorrow and I need a new idea, I would um, I would look at a market that I find interesting, whatever it is. Let's say I want to start up a fintech business. I would just see if there are some financial companies that allow me to learn how their processes um, are structured, and I know that if I just learn how they do things, I'll figure out ways to improve it. So that's how I would go about it.
And you mentioned once that there's a way how you can get customers to finance your idea. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah. So when I had this first customer who told me how their buying process went, and I thought, okay, let's build an iPad app for them. I kind of set up a revenue sharing model with them. So I think for them it was worth quite a lot to have such a tool. And I got a quote from a development company in India to build it for around 10,000 euros, and it was just the first version. So what I set up with them is a contract that they would pay that full amount, and they would get 20% of the revenue I got after that, up to the point where they got their money back. And for them, that sounded good because otherwise they felt like they would have to pay for it anyway. But now they had the chance to get it back. For me, it was great because they financed the tool, but it was my tool. They had an incentive to sell it more, so they actually brought me in contact with other retailers as well. Um, so I didn't need any money in that sense. And I think very often people think you have to get a VC early on, or you have to, find an angel or anything. But to be honest, getting your customers to finance things, I did it again later when I had an idea for an extension on the product, and I got like 5 customers to all pay like 2,000 for it. And the great thing is, this is also extreme market validation because you don't have anything, you just have an idea, and you already found out that people are willing to pay for it. So from the perspective of lean startup, for instance, it makes so much sense. I would even say, if you have a good idea and your customer's not willing to finance part of it upfront, you don't have a good idea, and you'll be wasting your money financing it yourself, probably.
But don't you think that sometimes the customer really needs to see it in order to be willing to pay for it and experience it?
Yeah, so obviously it really depends on the product and the market. So if you look at the consumer market, for instance, it's going to be very hard to get people to pay upfront. But also there you've had big developments like crowdfunding, but also like Kickstarter is the best example of that. You can actually get consumers to pay for something before you have it. Um, and yes, people have to see it, but you can build videos, you can build wireframes, you can talk to them. There are almost always ways to get them to understand what you're going for. Um, sure, there are probably exceptions, but generally.
And when you started your current company, what were your challenges in the beginning?
So the whole beginning was a big challenge. So as I said, it was called Nyon because I didn't know what the hell we were going to do. So in the end, we built this iPad app called Order Right, and in the end, now it's a whole platform. It's a totally different business. I didn't know that upfront that it was going to be that kind of business, and I hope if I ever do it again, that I do have that vision and everything. Would have made things a bit easier. But for me, the vision came really slowly, and I really kind of like needed it staring me in the face before I understood it. What was particularly hard is I was coming from a business model where I was just renting out myself for an hourly rate, and I had two guys working for me, and I also just rented them out for an hourly rate, which is a very unscalable but very good business model in the sense that you have very little cost and you earn a lot. And then to change that to a business model, a product business model, which costs tremendous amount of money because suddenly you're hiring developers that they have to get paid every month. And I wasn't good at sales yet, so the revenue wasn't coming in big time. So basically my operating results went down like crazy, So it was interesting because I felt things were going better than ever before. I got a lot of good customers who bought our product. And I could see that if I was able to do that another 100 times, I would have a tremendous business. But at the same time, I had so much cost that I had to give up my apartment. I started living with my mom again, which was fine for me because I knew business is going well, even though financially you don't see that.
Mm-hmm.
And back at the time, I had a lot of entrepreneurs around me, and some of the more senior ones told me, David, you can't run a business like you do without financing. I was trying to bootstrap a technology business, and in the end, we did bootstrap a technology business, but it was really hard and cost years that probably wouldn't have been necessary if I would have gotten any financing earlier on.
And how did you manage to bootstrap it then?
I kept costs really low. I did almost everything myself. Totally reinvented myself. Started doing a lot of sales, cold calling. I had a driver that I got through Facebook who was driving me through the country so that I could do customer support in the car and then quickly go to a sales meeting, putting my phone on silent, but then answering all the calls when I was back in the car. And all the time, and sometimes I had to take on an assignment on the side, which distracted me tremendously from actually scaling the business that made sense. But it's just to pay the bills. It's also one of those things, like I would never do that again in that way. I think it was good that I did it, but it makes no sense if you have a good idea that you should scale to allow yourself all these distractions just because of money. And definitely now, currently, there's so much money in the market and it's looking for opportunities to invest. It would have been pretty easy to find an investor who would give me leeway for a year so that I could concentrate. But back then I didn't have that insight, and I was 23, 24, and I was also a little bit afraid of letting somebody else in the business. So I think it didn't make me fail, but I lost years there. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's definitely a failure.
And you mentioned that in the beginning you didn't have a vision also for a long time. So when was the turning point for you when you had that?
I still feel sometimes that vision comes a bit slow. Even though it's getting bigger and bigger, but still. I think things gotten a bit more clear to me after a lot of repetition. So I didn't know the retail market at all, the fashion market. So it was also really hard for me to know how able I was to sell my product a lot of times. And at some point, I think I had 10 or 20 customers. And then I thought, well, if I can get 20, I can get 40. And if I can get 40, I can get 100. So then I started to think a little bit bigger. And at some point, I also iterated on our product and came up with the idea to include brands. And I could see how it would move from being a tool or a SaaS product to a platform. So that also really helped me to think bigger. And when I started talking to brands, really like important big brands in the Netherlands, and saw that their problems are actually real, that also helped me think a little bit bigger and have more confidence that this could actually be something bigger than just me having a product for a bunch of clients.
And 1.5 years ago, you merged, like you already said, with a German company. So, what was your experience going through the merger, and where did you encounter the biggest problems?
Yeah, so maybe first it's interesting why to merge. And I learned a lot from it. But first off, so what I discovered was a company in Germany who was run by also very young people, around 30, average age maybe 26, with the same vision, but totally different products in a different market. So that was actually like bullseye for us, because would allow us, when doing it together, would allow both of us to scale faster in different markets, put the product suite together and have a more rounded product, and not face competition in 2-3 years because we would run into each other. So that was the premise. And then you have to convince. So back then, they had investors, we had investors at that time, and you have to convince yourself and everybody else that it's a good idea. So we did that with spreadsheets, but that's the typical rationalizing that what you already feel, right? We just met each other and thought, no way we should do this on our own. You guys are cool. Let's do this together, you know? And then we went through the process. Okay, how are we going to convince everybody, including ourselves, that that actually makes sense? So we built an Excel sheet with a bunch of synergies written out, cost lines that we wouldn't have anymore, extra revenue lines, speeding up everything. And I think we went through the process pretty quickly. We met first in April, we merged in October, and then needed maybe 2 more months for the legal work, but that's when we already announced it. So then it happens, right? And then reality hits you as well. So first of all, now, like 1.5 years later, it was absolutely a great idea. Everything we felt why it would be a good idea was true, even better. But everything we put in the Excel sheet was wrong. So the synergies, like simple examples, yeah. So they use Gmail, we use Outlook. Well, you need only one. Well, I still have my Outlook account because people are still emailing and I don't want to cancel it, right? And so that's the synergy that didn't happen. And it's a lot of those things. Let's say revenue. Okay, so you go together, you start selling to each other's customers, and that instantly explodes in positive sense. But then what happens is, first 6 months you're just busy with each other. Processes, how do we hire people? How often do we meet? What do we do in such meetings? How do we decide things? Suddenly we had to decide things with 6 people instead of 3. So I think first 6 months was just gone. We're just running behind our own tails. And only then suddenly you get into sort of a mode where it makes sense, and you're effective. At the same time, I have to say the market was very easy to catch up with it. They quickly understood who we were now, and acknowledged pretty quickly that we're a more dominant player, and probably one of the leading companies in the future. So also commercially, we got a lot more important customers because of it. And even we got new investors because of it. So internally, it didn't speed up things at first, and later it did. And externally, it did immediately. And then struggles. Let's say decision making is hard with a lot of people. We had 3 people management in Holland and 3 people in Germany, and now we have 6. And we have to really consciously say, okay, who has to be involved in this decision? Who is responsible for this part of the business? And it's a constant struggle. We're still figuring out how to do it, but you can't decide with 6 people. It's just annoying to have discussions with 6 people, and everybody has their opinion, so yeah.
So, did you figure out like a small solution how to tackle that? the decision-making problem so far?
Yeah, so one of the things we do with new decisions is we say, okay, which 3 people are going to decide about this? And the rest is just kind of tagging along with the decision. We also set up quite clear-cut responsibilities. So like you're responsible for sales, you're responsible for product. And when somebody's responsible, they make the decision and they make sure they get informed, but that's it. So we're very explicit about it right now. And I think we can do even a better job. So as we're going, we're also learning how to do that. Yeah. Then culture is also interesting perspective. So I really learned there are different cultures, and I thought it was Germany versus Holland, so to speak. But I don't think it's that. I mean, that exists. But what I found with us, we just have different company cultures, and like right now, it doesn't feel like that much anymore.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit, where the differences are in company culture?
Yeah. So merging a Dutch and a German company, I thought, okay, we're gonna hit this national culture difference.
Yeah.
And surely I see some of that. And I can elaborate on that as well. But I've also just seen 2 companies are just not the same. Always. That's always the case, you know? You build up a history with each other and somebody else builds up a different history. And to merge that, you have just little different ways. And so sometimes I found that we were in a discussion about German versus Dutch culture in the dev team. And then I was thinking about it. We actually have like near no Dutch and German people in our dev teams. You know, they're coming from everywhere. So the dev team is our development team. So our programmers. And yeah, so we have people from Argentina, from Russia, from Romania, Moldavia. And we were talking about the Dutch culture and the German culture, but it makes no sense. There's nobody there who's Dutch or German. But they both have been used to something in a certain way, and to change that is a slow process. But to be aware of what it is, you know, what is the reason that things have friction, for instance, I think is really important. And we're getting better and better at that as well. But one of the mistakes we made is to not get like a professional on board in the beginning. You know, we really figured out everything ourselves with a lot of frustration that came with that.
So you mean a professional for post-merger integration?
Exactly. Yeah. Would have made sense.
Are there any things that you did to help that process that you saw were beneficial?
I think generally we should have simply done more. We were so busy with making the merger work that we felt like all the time we spent on each other is a bit of a waste, and we should be working with our clients again. And I don't know if I would do it very different, because yeah, it's just this general feeling, you know, you spend first two months deciding on a merger, then another 2-3 months on the legal work. So then when you're finally done with that and you haven't attended to your customers for 5 months or something, and then to spend even more time on the merger is just unnatural. So maybe it made sense that we focused on our customers, but at some point I think it was good that we started like having little trips together, going skiing, upper skiing, getting drunk together, that kind of stuff. Maybe we should have done that a little bit earlier, because that's also like how you become friends.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know if it's important to become friends in a management team, but we were used to being friends in a management team, and we didn't spend the time to make friends in the beginning. So I would do that different probably next time.
Can you maybe tell us still about a certain scary decision that you had to face and what it was like for you going through that?
Yeah, so I'm thinking of personal one and a business one. So let's maybe start with the personal one. I don't know, maybe the label scary decision doesn't work too well on it, but it was a really tough decision. So when I was 18, just started for myself, right? That's also around the time when I moved out of my home where I lived with my mom. And she moved as well. And it's the first time when we really separated. We were living in a different city, and now she was on her own. And that really hit her hard to first have 18 years with one child and then suddenly be all on her own. And she didn't have any friends. She didn't have a job. She was really on her own.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And financially, she she has always had trouble to manage things. And since I was like, let's say 14, I was opening the letters, the bills, and managing that a little bit, but that also changed when I moved out, so she was really on her own. And that was so dramatic that she just didn't manage it, and she was kicked out of her house. And for me, just starting on my own, it was extremely hard to help her with that. And back then I had a now very good friend who was my neighbor in the student home, who was 11 years older than me. And he sat me down and he said, "Look, David, it's not your responsibility to take care of this situation. So you should really think long and hard if you still want to help your mom with these kind of things, because you are also trying to get yourself sorted." So I did think long and hard about that, but I made a decision. For me, it was quite clear, but still was tough situation to go all in and help her out, because no way I would feel happier if she would be somewhere on the street.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And so we went through years of going to psychologists, of going to court to help her, get rid of all debts. I went to a foundation that we have in Holland that helps people like this who start managing their finances. I helped saving. I started paying her like once every 3 days so that she couldn't waste the money but still, had something.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 years later, 4 years later, maybe, we got out of that. No more debt, no more sorrow. My business was running. I got a little bit stronger and sorted things out for myself. So it wasn't so much a decision where I wasn't sure what to do, but it was really tough to handle that situation. And it was also one of my biggest wins ever to get out of that and get her out of that as well. It's one of the things I'm most proud of. And I would say it's definitely on par with building a successful business,
Why is that?
because it's even it's even better than that, because it's more important for me. You really love somebody and you want them to be well, and then if they're not well and that's constantly on your shoulders, it's such a source of stress. So in to have overcome that is a big, really big win for me.
Were there any realizations that helped you through that?
I think it was a big realization that even if it makes no sense at all, it was my situation, and so I dealt with it. Even though I could have said, "Yeah, well, it's not my responsibility. You do it yourself," But that I think the big learning there is it wasn't right, but it did make me happy to
Mm-hmm.
help. And ever since I find myself very often in situations where if I just stick to what is right, it won't make me happy. So I go for happiness. I always choose happiness over what is right or what should be the case or what does make sense.
Because you say what is right. Well, in your opinion, how do you determine what is right? Because I guess everyone determines that for themselves, right? Or do you see more what is right, what society perceives, or what your friends say around you?
what is right is how things are supposed to be. And so if your question is how are things supposed to be, we I think we all have preconceived notions on how things should be. And that includes how a parent should take care of their kid, and that includes how your relationship should be. And then it turns out that it's not like that. So I totally agree with you that there is no right in that sense, but there is still a way that you thought things were supposed to be, and that is the right. And then reality hits you, and it's not like that. And then I constantly find myself choosing happiness, um, and then just dealing with a situation that's wrong.
And you also wanted to talk about a certain business decision that was very hard for you?
Yeah, so it was more like that. So I'm talking about the decision to get our latest investor on board. In the end, it was a super good decision, and I think it was also slightly a no-brainer. But at the same time, it was very tough to make that decision because it was a little bit scary to get such a big investor on board, and also it was we were not sure how the market would see that, because we were a little bit afraid to lose part of our neutrality. So this is the personal holding company of one of the biggest wholesale companies in the world, and it's easy to think that that would influence our decision making as management to the point where our customers are not. It's not to the benefit of our customers. Um, so that's one of the things. Like we thought really long and hard if that would happen, but eventually we thought, okay, to have an investor on board with the money of a VC or more, but with the structure of a private company is just very beneficial for us. And in a way, competition is about product, but competition is also about people you hire, and it's also about how your financial situation. If you can out invest your competitor, that's a real strength. That's really a big problem for them. So we decided to get this big investor on board and start spending more and faster to not be outspent by competitors. So I think for me personally, it was also very interesting because how do you evaluate your company when really big money comes in and you're mostly valued on your future potential? And I learned a lot from that, because when I started and with my first investor, it was very simple. It was an investment as I would have imagined it back then, which is you get a guy who sees potential in your company, he invests some money in it, and he gets a part of it, and it's like that. That's all. And only now with structuring our latest deal, and also one of the deals before that, I learned more about the whole startup ecosystem and how VCs fund. And now I understand why a company with some random guy who has an idea can be worth a million. And it all has to do with the secondary agreements in such a finance deal. So, for instance, when a big VC comes on board and the founder says, "I think we're worth a million," and the VC agrees with that, that company is not actually worth a million. So what they do is they put some money in it with some secondary clauses that say that if next round the company turns out not to be worth a million but half a million, they will get a compensation. So they will get to double their share, as if they've also invested at 500K, for instance. This is something to be really aware of as a founder, how you structure deals with people who are investing in your company, because founders have no experience with this at all. VCs often have a lot of experience with this. It's something that can easily make you lose your company, for instance.
Because you have to compensate from your share all the
Exactly.
time, yeah?
And it can go pretty far. So it can go to a point where, for instance, a VC would invest a very small amount at a very high valuation. As a founder, you think you've done a really good job because you've made your spreadsheet, you've shown them that there's massive potential. The VCs have looked at it and see no way he's going to hit those numbers, but we'll just go along with it with a small amount. And then in the next round, when you're not hitting those numbers and you really need money because you started your growth plan, that's when the VC can do the second round and say, look, you're not worth as much as you thought, and you need a lot more money. So now we're going to invest at a way lower valuation. And you will lose a much bigger part of your business through that. So for me, it was super interesting to come from a situation where it was just a plain investment like you would imagine to one where there's massive contracts and many different ways on how you can structure it. And I think in our last round, we did a superb job in managing all those clauses and having founder-friendly terms. But I talk to a lot of founders and I see that there's very little knowledge about how to do these things.
Are there certain clauses you think someone should watch out for?
Yeah. So I would say down round protection is a very important one. That's the one where if the second round after your last round is at a lower valuation, you have to compensate. There are different ways to do it. Most founder friendly is to not do it. And then you have the way where you compensate on average, so slight compensation. But then there are also the clauses where you have to compensate fully, which means you lose a very big part of your business if the round after your last one is lower. And the second one that I think is very important to be aware of is a liquidation preference. It's the one where if you sell the company, all the money that has gone into the company till that point first has to be returned to the investors before you as a founder see anything. That can bring you to a point where if you've worked with too high valuations, you end up selling the company and not earning anything yourself.
Thank you so much for explaining that. Do you still have like a last key takeaway, something that you would still like to share?
So one key takeaway from my side is that I slowed down our growth in the beginning a lot because I didn't think getting an investor on board was a viable option, and I was also very afraid of it. And looking back, I would never do it without that anymore because you just lose time. And then I would also say for the people who've never gotten an investor on board, there is a lot of money. It's really looking for ways to invest right now. Um, so don't be afraid that people are not going to value your business. Also, investors are most of the time really nice people who are willing to help you, and they even offer more than just money. So to have somebody invested in your success will also really make you more successful. So it is my learning to not be afraid of that and to just ask around, because I think an investor or somebody who's willing to put some money into your business is these days never too far away. Maybe if you are listening to this and you are in a city where there's not a lot going on in financing, go to Amsterdam, for instance, because there's a lot here. That's also something I did. I moved to Amsterdam, and then here I found there are a lot of VCs and investors and everything. In Utrecht before there was way less of that. So that's also important. But it's there, and just know that so that you can use it for your business and grow faster.
All right. And how can still people contact you?
So if anybody has any questions about this, just add me on LinkedIn, David Schaap. I'm super happy to answer questions or to help out. So definitely do that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.